Meet Julia Gillard, the first woman to become Prime Minister in Australia. Miss Gillard had one of the highest rates of legislative output in the history of the office. And she's well known for speaking out against sexism during one hell of an address to Parliament. Today, Miss Gillard is focusing on her passion for education, especially for young girls. She's the board chair for the Global Partnership for Education and spends her time advocating for better education systems in developing countries. This is Coffee Talk with Julia Gillard.
Great.
Okay, we better do some work.
I know. So I know we're breaking the cardinal rule of Coffee Talk. We didn't get coffee.
We didn't get coffee.
But there's something very elegant about drinking a San Pellegrino with a former Prime Minister.
Oh, thank you very much. And I think on a nice warm day, the San Pellegrino is going down very well.
Oh, it's great. So I have to tell you, you are one of my ultimate lady crushes.
Oh, that's very
I
sweet.
don't know if I'm allowed to say that to a former Prime Minister.
You are,
but
and
you
it's
are.
very nice of you. Thank you.
Of course. So I actually teared up when I watched you deliver that speech to Tony Abbott when
Oh.
you were in leadership. I did.
Good.
And I really feel like it reverberated around the world. Did you ever think that that moment was going to be so epic?
No, I didn't. I mean, when I was giving the speech, I knew it was sort of being powerful because in our parliament you're actually quite close to the opposition, and they went from sort of yelling and interjecting to sort of dropping their heads to looking at their phones. So I knew it was powerful in there, but I never expected it to sort of, get around the world the way it did. And women still come up and talk to me about that speech, and I think for so many it's come to represent what they wish they'd said in a moment where they felt particularly discriminated against. So I'm proud of that.
Yeah, it's really inspirational.
Good.
It was. And also, I'm really glad you're here because I just finished listening to a podcast that you were featured on, Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell.
He was a delight to
He
speak
was?
to.
What is he like? I'm so interested.
Well, I only spoke to him on the phone, but absolute delight to speak to, and I've really enjoyed his books and thought that he was a, deep and original thinker in our times, and the podcasts he's doing are just wonderful, so I was delighted to be part of one.
It was really good, and in this one specifically, he talks about women who were the first to do something, but he talks about this thing called moral licensing, which is when someone does a good deed or opens a door for someone, they no longer feel like they have to continue that good behavior, which I think is really interesting, but he argues that this is the reason why so many female prime ministers have only been in office once and there haven't been other female prime ministers or presidents. Do you think that this is going to happen in Australia, that there will not be another female prime minister for a long time?
Oh, I think there'll be another female Prime Minister. I don't think it will be in the incredibly short term, because if you look at Australian politics now, the leader of the Labor Party, Bill Shorten, I think will be there for a long time to come. Malcolm Turnbull, our Prime Minister, has just been elected, so not in the short term. But I do think that there will be other women leaders, and part of the breaking of the glass ceiling, I think, is women watch it, and some women are inspired by it, but some women actually look at what the first woman went through and think to themselves, gee, if it's that hard, I don't want to do it. And I've actually had young women come up to me and say, watching your experience in politics has made me less likely to go into it. And so one of the reasons I wrote my book very quickly is I wanted it to stand for the alternate proposition that whilst there is some gendered, stupid stuff that still happens, the delight of political leadership is you get to do things you really believe in. And, I want so many young women, women generally, to think that this is a path for them. And I hope here in the United States, if we see Hillary Clinton as president, that's a global inspiration moment too.
Right, I agree. And that reminds me of Hillary because she's gone through so much criticism. Do you think that she's handled it well?
Oh, I think Hillary's shown how robust she is in the face of ridiculous criticism. And it's quite difficult to get the response, right as a political leader, particularly as a woman, if there's gendered criticism. If you call it out, then I think you've done the right thing in naming and shaming sexism, but inevitably you'll run into, gee, you're just playing the gender card, or you're just whinging, or you're not tough enough for the job. So it can be quite difficult. I think that actually puts a lot of responsibility on the rest of us to say it's not just the female political leader who should be responding to sexism in politics. It's actually all of us who should be responding to it and saying, we don't want, whatever political issue is under debate, we want that debate to be sensible. We don't want it to be sexist.
And I feel like part of being a woman is learning how to be a good actress, because I feel like this responsibility to constantly juggle different versions of myself based on which situation I'm in. And that's hard, that's a lot of pressure. Do you feel like men have to do this as much as women do?
I think there are some things about leadership that work differently for men, and since leaving politics I've actually been increasingly drawn to looking at the academic research about gender, and it's really fascinating. And part of that research very clearly shows that likeability and leadership are correlated for men. When people see a male leader, their predisposition is to believe that he is also likeable, whereas when they see a female leader, their predisposition is to believe that she's not likeable because she's acting against the sort of gender stereotypes of nurturing and empathy by being commanding. And so people think, well, if she's being commanding, she must have given up on the nurturing and empathy bit, and I bet she's, pretty hard-boiled, or she's a bit of a, and you know what word lies in that sentence. And these things are said very frequently about female leaders. So I think a thing we've got to bust through is that, sort of gendered stereotype that whispers to all of us that a woman who's really out there and commanding and leading, that she too can be a very likeable person.
And do you have any advice for day-to-day women who are going through this in their professional life, at home? What can they do to kind of fight this criticism without worrying too much about it and it being kind of unhealthy?
Yeah, I think if people get too pressurised and obsessed about it, then it can start a very difficult cycle. I think it is important to nurture a very strong sense of self, and when I speak particularly to schoolgirls and young women, I really try and impress upon them the point that you've got to have a sense of self that's not hostage to the critiques of others. The most recent thing that's been said about you on Facebook or whatever. It doesn't mean you should be impervious to, reasonable criticism. We've all got to accept constructive criticism, but some of the vile stuff that circulates on social media and even in traditional media about women leaders, I think you've got to have a sense of self that's detached from that, and that gives you a little bit of ability to analyse the situation without your emotions being completely hostage and in the moment.
And I want to talk about, you were just at the Women Deliver conference in Copenhagen. I watched your speech. You talked a little bit about how gender played a role in your education. How did that shape where you are today with GP?
Yeah, I had a great education. My parents migrated to Australia. We were Welsh. I was born in Wales, and we migrated to Australia. We just went to the local government schools, and fortunately for me and my sister, they were great schools, and we got a good education. But I did my schooling in the 1960s and 1970s. I was born in 1961, and there were still bits of it that were gendered. In high school, when the boys went to do woodwork, metalwork, electronics, we girls went to do cooking, sewing and laundry, so we would be ready for those domestic duties.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy, and I even thought it was crazy at the time, so it's not a revision with adult eyes. I thought it was silly at the time.
Did you get a passing grade?
No. And the disturbing thing that happens when you're Prime Minister and you go back and you visit your old school is they do dig your old report cards out.
Really?
Yeah, I got presented with my old report cards with TV cameras rolling, and I couldn't remember what they said, and I was thinking, oh, this would be dreadful. But what they clearly showed was a fail in home economics.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Probably made you more popular with women.
Maybe it did. Does mean that I'm not very good if you want to come around for dinner. I'm not much of a cook.
Oh, that's okay. So I want to switch to girls' education. You are a big advocate for girls' education, and I know for a lot of people, supporting girls' education seems like something that's so far off, so hard to do. How can people support this topic?
Well, one thing I can certainly say, having been Prime Minister, is that if people do get involved and raise their voices and say that they want something done and feature an issue like girls' education, it does make a difference to political decision making. I know from my own time when we made decisions about where we were putting foreign aid dollars, that the community movements for change made a difference to how we were thinking about that. And I feel in our world today that this focus on girls' education, that the whole world seems to have, will mobilise new resources, provided there is great advocacy for it. So I really would be encouraging people to say to their leaders, girls' education is the thing that's going to change our world. It'll change the lives of individual girls, but the evidence is really clear. If you educate a girl, then she's much more likely to be able to choose when she marries. She's much more likely to be a healthy young woman, to not get HIV/AIDS, for example. When she chooses to have children, she'll choose to have fewer children. They'll be healthier children. They'll be much more likely to be vaccinated, much more likely to go to school. So you put a whole community on a path to change and empowerment.
Agree. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.